either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And we have come to suck your blood in this first episode.
You got so far.
Sounds too Italian to me.
And you did unfortunately switch from
Hotel
Transylvania accent to Italian.
That actually be a fun movie, a vampire.
An Italian vampire?
Yes.
They'd be ruined, the amount of garlic.
True. But we are doing vampires for the Halloween season, if you didn't guess from my hint at the end of the last episode. We are kicking it off with Hammer's Horror of Dracula, originally called Dracula, but changed to avoid confusion with Universal's 1931 movie of the same name.
Which now no one is confused by at all. In fact,
No.
I think most people just call this movie Dracula now.
No, its official title is Horror of Dracula.
Its official title is, however, when people say, "Oh yeah, I love the old Dracula movie," this is what they meant.
Yeah, well, depends. I mean, it depends on who you have, because, that's the thing is we did talk about reviewing the 1931 movie.
We did, and I do like that movie.
And we love Christopher Lee too much, and honestly...
That's honestly my main problem, yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, with our circle of people, I haven't really heard too many people talk about his version of Dracula. It's always the Bela Lugosi looking that you think of when people talk about Dracula, or the general public talks about Dracula.
That is definitely iconic imagery. But I know, as someone with a circle of other Christopher Lee loving friends, his performance of Dracula is something that every Halloween we bring up, even if we do not bother to watch the movies because we're horror fans and we spend all of our free time watching horror films.
Very much so.
However, this is technically a horror film, and maybe it should get added to the list.
It's more than just a horror film. I'll get into the ratings a little bit at the end of this episode.
Absolutely.
But The Horror of Dracula is based on the novel by Bram Stoker with screenplay by Jimmy Sangster.
Now, if you're going to watch this movie in hopes to pass your writing class, I will disappoint you greatly. This movie is loosely based on the book written by Bram Stoker.
Yeah, but directed by Terence Fisher, starring Peter Cushing, another horror icon.
Oh, fantastic.
As Dr. Van Helsing.
Arguably the Dr. Van Helsing. He reprises this role several other times.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking classic.
For sure.
Michael Gough as Arthur Holmwood, and the Christopher Lee in his first role as the iconic Dracula, which no one else was even auditioned for.
They didn't even consider anyone else, and I agree with that life choice.
Very much so. But our sources for today's episode include House of Horror, the complete Hammer film story by Cretan Books, The Hammer Story, the authorized history of Hammer films by Marcus Hearn and Alan Barnes. And it's interesting seeing where this movie kind of came from, because before Hammer was struggling just a little bit, before they released a successful film called The Curse of Frankenstein.
I remember it, yes.
And and then of course they're just like, okay, well the next thing we're going to do is, we'll just continue the classics, we're going to do Dracula.
Honestly, a classical choice, yeah.
But the big issue is, like many movie rights, it was difficult to get in the 30s because Universal had obtained an exclusive contract with Stoker's estate, which blocked all other rights by other filmmakers to use this character.
Yeah.
And at this point, I think it's also important to note that Universal hadn't really done anything with Dracula in a long time.
Yeah, not yet. They revive it eventually, but...
Yeah, the last movie that they had done, a solo Dracula movie, wasn't even fully Dracula. It was 1943, Son of Dracula.
Not as good.
But they did use him again in 1944 and 1945, respectively, with House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula.
Of course.
As well as in 1948 with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
A classic.
So it's been about a decade since they had even done anything with the character himself.
And you have to remember that 30s and 40s, and honestly, almost all the way up until mid-60s, the name Dracula was really it was less of just this historical character that we think of now. We're oh, anybody can do a Dracula or just rename him to something else. It was very much a solid icon. People recognized it as Bram Stoker specifically. That was something that you could not get away from. You couldn't just rename the character and be oh look, it's another vampire like we do now.
Yeah, and that's the way we almost lost Nosferatu Symphony of Darkness, because or Symphony of Terror. I can't remember what the subtitle of that one, but
you know the one.
Yeah, either way, that's the reason we almost lost it, because Stoker's widow had tried to have every single copy of it burned, and luckily a couple survived, so that's how we still have that original, the first surviving major vampire movie.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, there were a couple before this, so...
there absolutely was.
But Nosferatu was, like, the big one.
No, for sure. And you also have to remember that, again, now the idea of vampires themselves are pretty much not copyrightable. It's just a monster.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, this was, again, the only one was Dracula, for the most part in the West.
To a point. I mean, there's...
To a point.
There's also Carmilla that predates Dracula by, 20, 30 years, I think?
Yes, I think a lot of the reason Carmilla got away with it, though, was because she had tits. I think if the movie had been... No,
Carmilla the book.
Oh, yes.
She that story predates...
yes.
Bram Stoker's by many, many years.
Yes, but famously, Stoker's estate hasn't gone after written material very heavily.
Yeah.
They
can't really. What right do they have over something that was done way before that?
Well, sure. They definitely would have tried. There was... They, much like the Anne Rice estate, tried very hard to put a very heavy hand on what they considered their property, which that's their prerogative, sure, but it did kind of hurt the idea of vampires and Dracula specifically. Whereas, unlike with the Rice conflict, when she passed, suddenly that was, all opened up and we were much more accessible to, not just recreations of the products, but also, fan interactions. Dracula didn't have that luxury because not only did his widow keep a hard hand on it, but then his estate became separate after she died and kind of tried to continue on that idea. Not a big thing anymore. We don't have to worry about it, obviously, with the vast amount of Dracula content currently available, but this was a different time, so yeah, rights for specifically Dracula, harder to get.
But ultimately, Hammer did get permission to make it, with Universal holding the distribution rights, so that's, as much as there'd like to be more drama behind it, there's not a whole lot.
There's not, and honestly, it seems like even today, it's still a pretty happy stand with the two. Universal still possesses the rights to distribute, and regularly uses the Christopher Lee Dracula in their Halloween merchandising.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing, is Hammer went defunct, and then someone bought the rights up again, so yeah. Hammer's in a little bit of a weird state right now. I think they mostly have their Frankenstein franchise.
I believe so, but it doesn't seem like it's the end of the Dracula horror for at least what Universal is willing to deal with. Which I'm pleased with, because they're known for burying stuff and then never bringing it back.
Very much so. So, Chris, before we get into it, what are we drinking today?
Well, blood is off the menu, just, for sake of those of us who are actually living. So we have Angry Orchard's hard apple cider in the blood orange flavor.
Specifically the holiday special with Michael Myers. Or no, not Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees.
Jason. This is definitely Jason.
Cheers.
Delicious. I love it. 4 more. Also, one might argue that is just the Mighty Ducks.
I still haven't seen the Mighty Ducks.
You will hate it.
I know. But horror of Dracula. I do appreciate that, and it kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah.
Of how a little bit serious this started off with, the elaborate title card and everything. I
love how serious this is, because when people who are not familiar with old versions, especially Christopher Lee's Dracula, they often start with the goofier later ones. And that's not why I love this character.
Mm-hmm.
This, especially Christopher Lee, took this so seriously. And I think the title card sets you up for what is meant to be a very serious retelling.
Very much so, and especially with the oppressive music and the eagle gargoyle looking down on us. It's a simple, ramping up to the casket with Dracula. And honestly, so the thing I will say, I think I'd maybe seen one of the later Christopher Lee Draculas before this.
Yes.
But this is the first time I actually watched it, was this year. And dear listeners, I'm not much of a vampire watcher for the most part.
You are now. I forced it.
But yeah, but this year, to integrate myself into the genre and understand it a little bit more, I did watch 150 over 150 vampire movies.
I'm so proud of you.
To get here.
Welcome to the vampire cult. We are a happy little group that watch a lot of really shitty movies, unfortunately.
And I feel I have barely scraped the surface.
Unfortunately, the amount of bad vampire films really does outweigh. This one is one that, personally, as a vampire lover, this is one of my favorite monsters of all time, second only to werewolves. And this is a really good starting spot, because not only are we serious, but this sets up kind of the overall recreation and story likeness that the vampire character, especially a Dracula version, generally does better in. So our set, very stage-like, lots of room for the characters and actors to walk around and kind of parade around in front of the camera. We do get some close-up shots, but there's this big wide lens to kind of show off the almost stage-like production.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on top of that, the blood dripping lets us know that's going to be a bit more violent. But
which is fantastic.
Yeah, but I do want to go back real quick. Is vampires and werewolves your favorite because of Twilight, or did you like Twilight because you like both?
I like Twilight for the vampire and werewolf, and was, like many other movies, sorely disappointed by the amount of actual monsterness in them. My first love of the vampire and werewolf truly was the Van Helsing stupid movie, which I know we've talked about before. But that really started, like, I was forced to read multiple books about the creatures because that was part of our, like, lessons. Like, oh, you gotta read Dracula at some point. Oh, you gotta read... it's part of the classics. And as a Halloween-based child who recently got my old, like, children's-based books, I like to think Van Helsing, the movie, was my beginning. I have learned that that is not true. The amount of baby books that are specifically vampire, werewolf, and witch-themed that I now have, and I like, oh my god, I read this every night to myself. It's clearly like a trick-or-treat book. That I think that's truly where the obsession began.
Yeah, I was more of a ghost and serial killer interest.
Yeah.
Aliens too, obviously.
Well, understandably, but
yeah.
No, I've always been a huge fan of Christopher Lee, and so I think it was middle school that we discovered Christopher Lee was Dracula, because we didn't know him as that growing up. I mean, he was much later in his career, much more famous, and much older. And so that's where we kind of backtracked and went through Christopher Lee, and now, like, we just watched them and enjoyed them, and we'd watch them, we'd watch, like, one of the Dracula movies that he stars in. Almost every Halloween is kind of like a for funsies thing. And then we'd watch one of the newer, arguably worse vampire films, usually not starring Christopher Lee. And it was something of a friend tradition, as we all had a favorite monster. Vampire was easily up there on the list. But now it's really fun going back and learning that Christopher Lee did this role based solely off of his reading of the book.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it in our Lord of the Rings episodes of, like, how classical of a person Christopher Lee was. Hell, even in his performance in Wicker Man, he knew the lore and the ideas behind the magic. Oh,
absolutely. I think this one shows off, even early in his career, how well he is able to read between classical literature lines to pull together something that no one else had done for Dracula before. This performance was not based off of anyone else's. He didn't watch any other Draculas before this. In fact, according to an interview with him, he had never seen another Dracula movie. Ran out, read the book, and was like, oh, this man is sexy. I need to bring him to life.
Yeah, I don't know how true that would be. I mean,
it is a little hard to know. Because...
Yeah, especially with how impressive and big Bela Lugosi was as Dracula.
Oh, no, absolutely. And granted, a lot of the interviews I found with him were talking about this role decades later.
Yeah, well, and also to be fair, I mean, we're talking, this is 27 years after Lugosi's Dracula, and we're still at a time where if you didn't see it when it was in theaters, unless you had like a 35mm reel of it, or for some reason your theater was bringing it back, you could have easily missed.
Absolutely. I also think that it helped that Christopher Lee helped style the character quite a bit. This really sets him apart, because we don't start off with the Dracula character up front like we do with other vampire movies.
Well, and even then, like, we don't start off with, like, any of the other classic Dracula movies. It's kind of like this counter to the traditional telling of the past, where there's no real journey to finding the castle. Like,
no, yeah.
I mean, you see that repeated in El Vampiro.
Sure.
And any of these, like, really classic Dracula-style movies. But it starts off right up with Jonathan Harker at the castle.
And granted, I personally like the reworking of these main characters into kind of simplifying their roles and speeding the process along. Previous Draculas were fairly faithful in the retelling of the story, and that's fine. But for a film that is only, I believe, around 80-ish minutes long.
Yeah, it's 82, and I think it's only like 10 minutes longer than the original 1931 Lugosi adaptation.
Yeah, this is a fantastic, like, quickening of the characters. The Lugosi one spends a lot of time on imagery and having this very monster gothic romantic styling to it. It's very big, very flowy, and because of the time and the coloring system, you're spending a lot of time just being interested in the character look and like how they are moving through screen, as opposed to these very minute character differences that this one has time, but also smartly rewrites the characters to like get this moving a little bit.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is it's this beginning that shows a bit of the budget.
Yeah, it does.
Which I think, for like, honestly, for its runtime of 82 minutes, it had a budget of £81,000, which is about $2 million in today's money, or about 2.75 million in freedom currency, which
absolutely
to our standard is like massive budgets. But even then, back then, like, this is a relatively small budget movie.
It really was, and you have to remember that these sets are all handmade. We're not filming on location. So I'm not terribly upset that we've removed like the big journey leading up. There's no town. We only see inside of a tavern later.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay with it. I feel like you feel fine.
But that's the thing, it starts off like that, and it feels very close enough to the book on a budget.
Yes, it does.
And I like that you bring up like how stage-like it feels, because the very first shot of the castle interior is so clearly a stage.
Okay, but this is something that's a little bit of the time period. A lot of 1950s movies have this very over-the-top stage look to them.
Yeah, because we're starting to get into like the 60s and stuff, where we start getting these like psychedelic movies, or like these more minimalistic movies that are trying to be a little bit artsier or more for the stage.
Absolutely. And I think this is also a time period where we've kind of figured out a way of, if we have all these elements that are stage like, we can reuse them for other movies, which definitely happened. And it also it works a little bit better with the camera of the time, because this movie looked surprisingly crisp and clean, and part of that is because there's not a lot of stuff on the screen to kind of like muddy the camera. Yeah,
there's no elaborate decorations or gilding of anything. It's such a hard contrast from the actually pretty decent matte paintings we had.
True.
And the hard castle on the exterior. But I do like it's such a quick scene too, that you can easily overlook that it's clearly the backstage of one of the studios.
It 100% is.
Because the second room he goes into feels much more proper.
And it helps a lot too that we only really have one or two quote unquote large stages to worry about, and the other one is outdoors. And so it helps that a lot of these other rooms are much smaller, much more cozy in a way, where we don't have to worry so much about trying to fill enough space, but also keep it so that the camera can actually capture everything.
Very much so. It's almost a little, not 100%, but like how Wes Anderson has his Parcenian framing.
Absolutely.
But we're not 100% rigid like his movies are.
No, we do flow, and it is, especially if you like old 60s and 50s movies, this one fits the styling beautifully, but I do feel like has a nice... It balances the colors much better than a lot of the other 50 films that I've recently been watching. And partially it is that I think it keeps in that matte browns and grays and blacks tones. That way when we do get to reds, those colors really pop.
Yeah, very much so. And even though we talk about how this one starts to deviate or is quite a bit different, it really does take a little bit, because it also starts tweaking it in little places, like giving us that the origins of Harker are just a little bit different with his writing and his letter while he's eating, and also introducing the bride, which they do a great job of dropping the plate to distract Harker to allow the bride to walk in.
Absolutely. And I love her styling choice. This is, again, a pretty classic 60s choice for like timeless, sexy woman.
Titties.
And weird wrapping choices. We see this exact same dress styling reused for a bunch of others, usually in like a sandals or fantasy movie, especially for like a Greek time-based sort of one.
Yeah, well, you also see it in like the Mexican style of vampires, where they're a lot sexier. They've got a little bit more cleavage shown than what we would usually see in previous movies. And
Absolutely.
I think who was it? I think it was Cheech. In a documentary I watched on vampire movies, where he's like, yeah, it's probably has to deal with the Catholic guilt of
100%.
It makes it more forbidden that, okay, she's a little sexier than she should be for a modest Catholic girl.
Oh, absolutely. I also think, especially for an English production, this alludes to the idea of what we've talked about with other movies with the mysterious foreign and mysterious past. We're making her very alluring, but also very out of place. We see other people in this town. She is the only one dressed like this.
Yeah, especially for 58. I mean, it's something that House of Horror notes that this would set up the definition of the sexuality of the genre that would dominate for the next 15 years.
Absolutely. And it was both the director, Terrence Fisher, and also Christopher Lee, who both recognized that Dracula needed to be sexier. And I think this is done in a way that later it gets, we move that needle so far that it gets a little bit goofy. See Twilight. But also other iterations of Dracula and vampires, not even much farther later, do make a quote-unquote romantic effort for the character. But this is the first one where we are not worried about the romanticism of, like, oh, will he love me in 1,000 years? Should I become immortal? That is not the question in this movie at all. It is purely the sexual prowess of Dracula.
Yeah, well, and it's also done with verbally setting up the danger, and we don't have her a lot on the screen until Dracula interrupts.
Well, I also love that, especially if you haven't seen this movie before, which, granted, I don't think as many people have as should, but you don't recognize who she is because brides are usually portrayed right off the bat as vampiric or very other. She is so out of left field and shows up so randomly and so quickly, and we've redone the book story so far that you really are confused and like, oh, this poor woman is trapped in this Dracula house.
Yeah, or they're mostly nothing, just more of a potential danger character like in the original Draculas, and then even like up until really now. I mean, because you look at some of the ones that came after this. Well, I say that, but then you also have like Daughter of Dracula that kind of breaks that mold a little bit.
Sure, it's definitely something people have played with, but I like that from the get-go she is introduced, and she's introduced as a bit more of a wily character as opposed to the Dracula character who we meet in just a few scenes, and how commanding he is, and a lot of that is just Christopher Lee's presence on screen.
Oh yeah, and just like immediately seeing him in this dark silhouette before he comes down, and honestly, like the first shots we have of his are fully just a full face shot, kind of like how people were a little bit offended when Hexen came out, and it was too close for comfort. It feels a little bit that way, and it's this back and forth between him and Harker, where it's both their faces close to each other, not one's really dominating the other at this point.
No, it changes it from being an introduction between a count and his supposed librarian to hunter and hunter.
Very much so, but it's also for me a little bit weird just seeing Christopher Lee so young, because in this movie, to give perspective, in this movie, he's only like 36, so he's a couple years older than us.
No, I know. As one of the members of the Friends group for Christopher Lee, we have always joked, though, that the man came out the womb old, much like Morgan Freeman.
He was ready to fight in World War II the moment he was born.
This poor man. Granted, I think no one could possibly have portrayed Dracula in both this timeless, ageless way and also he oozes the confidence, the poise, the deep commanding voice, and all of his actions clearly were under this idea that he had worked with the director on, of that Dracula needs to be more than just a hunting machine. There has to be another level to him. And I don't think anyone other than Christopher Lee at the time could have done it. However, it is very odd to watch him and then watch something much later of him and be like, he has not changed that much.
No, not really.
I don't know if that means he's aged really well or if he was already old. One of the two.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you look back at like old yearbooks of when we say, oh, that person doesn't look like they were in high school, and then you look at the yearbook from the time and it's like, they looked a little bit older. I mean, when we talked about in Spider-Man 1, Kirsten Dunst turned 18 in the making of that movie.
She does not look 18.
That might be rude for some people, but
she doesn't though. She looks like an adult in that movie.
Yeah,
and
I mean, technically she is for most of the movie.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the other things, and that's something that I think, especially for the consistency of this Dracula character, because we will very briefly touch later on about Lee's, like, responsibility for the Dracula character in general later, but I think part of his success with the character is that Lee already has a very timeless, very British look to him. He has a very specific hairstyle, he has a very specific, like, grooming, and, like, the way he dresses himself off-screen and on-screen has remained relatively the same throughout his career.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of adds to the timeless nature of him, and it works so well for Dracula, because he doesn't just end with this movie. He does a lot. He does a lot more.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also what's interesting with this progression of scenes is we go from these open rooms to tighter and tighter conditions.
It feels a little claustrophobic at times.
Yeah, when we get to the room that he's going to be spending the night in, like, there's an L shape to walk around the room, and that's it.
Yes. The other thing that I love is as we get more and more into these tighter rooms, those rooms become more and more cluttered.
Mm-hmm.
Once we finally get to Harker's room, it has a bunch of random stuff that he didn't bring. He brings 2 suitcases, and, like, one of them is mostly full of 3 books and a picture of his fiancée.
Oh, yeah, and that's the other thing, too, I like with this movie is how it shows some of these infatuations, where the interest in the fiancé with the slight lingering of Christopher Lee looking at the photo while he sets it down instead of being uninterested in it.
And also the way he compliments it is so polite and yet odd.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not technically out of line, but it is a little bit extra, because essentially he is his boss. He's hired him to be the librarian that we know of right now.
Which is a nice twist of he's not coming to England. That's the big twist that we're supposed to be like, oh, this isn't going to be the same Dracula, because Harker is actually there to kill Dracula.
Yes.
He already knows about all this stuff about him.
Yeah, he's not the real estate agent, which I always thought was a little silly. This is, truthfully, a nice update to the story.
It is, because, like, when he gets locked in, he's like, oh, of course he's going to lock me in there. He doesn't trust me. It's showing that Dracula's a little bit more cautious. He's not this omnipotent being that we've seen in the other Nosferatu and Dracula movies, where he just is absolutely overpowering over everyone around him in this area.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I really love that we did right off the bat is this version of Dracula does not transform in any way, but he does mysteriously come and go. And I think that works maybe better for this age of film.
I do have some questions about that in a bit.
I probably don't have answers, but personally I like it better. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing practical and whatever the equivalent of drawn effects are for the time, however that was handled. But a lot of the time, those are what keep people from coming back to one of these older movies.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah, it can be hard to rewatch those older styles, especially for horror or fantasy movies, where you're supposed to have this over-the-top element, and they do look a little silly. Having him just kind of materialize out of the shadows with his long, scary Snape-like cloak is pretty good. This is a pretty good compromise.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too, is, like, I can see people's complaints with even Robert Eggers' Nosferatu of when it takes the time period piece so seriously, which isn't a bad thing. It just definitely does slow down the movie, because the more you go back to classic literature, it gets a little bit drier as you go back. Like, I mean, I tried listening to, like, Pride and Prejudice, and I just couldn't because of how dry it is.
It
like,
is very dry.
And honestly, as much as I love the Lord of the Rings movies, I've never finished the books, because I get about halfway through the Two Towers and it's just like, oh my god, this is such a long walk.
It is a lot of walking. Granted, if you can get to the parts where there is clearly snark happening in the books and read them in a, like, Valley Girl accent, that helps a lot. But, no, I agree. And as someone who likes and regularly reads classical literature, it is difficult to make those scenes interesting on film, because either those scenes are interesting in the book because of some very minute detail that, especially for the 50s and 60s, doesn't show up well on camera yet, or it's so fanciful that at the time we didn't have the technology to do something well by it. So I do like that we've changed it. It also adds a little bit more interest to the characters, because we find out very quickly that Jonathan isn't only changed in his career, but all of our other human characters get changed to have a little bit closer of a connection, which works well for this movie, because again, we've only got 80 minutes. I know the previous one only had 80 minutes as well, but one would argue that the story was a little bit looser there. This one, we at least get, like, a quick, oh, we have a sibling, like, connection. That's why we care about this obvious, kind of random person if you only have 80 minutes to explain a story.
Yeah, it ended up being a little bit more about the grandiousness of the sets in the 1931 adaptation.
Absolutely. It also leads us room because, especially for this time, I don't think it would have been a spoiler for everyone to be like, okay, well, that's cool that they changed it, but when does Harker die? Because unfortunately, in almost every adaptation of Dracula, Harker does die. That's part of the original telling.
No, he survives.
He does, but this is one of those movies that sets a precedent for having Dr. Van Helsing be a much more interesting and an integral character than the way the books just kind of like lightly include him.
Yeah, we'll get to how it definitely sets up Van Helsing as the more iconic character than what he was in the books.
Absolutely, and I think a huge part of that is starting off with the dynamic between Dracula and Jonathan, where Jonathan is dressed proper but a little stiff, and Dracula is so over the top.
Yeah. Well, and even then, when we start building up the conflict with the door quietly unlocking, and also the mansion getting darker and feeling creepier, it's becoming more oppressive than when we first saw it. As he's wandering further and further into the lair, there's this darkening of everything around him.
A nice change from getting rid of the like lightning and thunder we normally see.
Yeah, and it's all a trap set up by the bride, which I like that he's pushing with the bride, because there's this bit where he's like, okay, I kind of know what you're up to, and it's almost like he's trying to lay the trap.
Yes.
But he kind of messes it up a little bit, showing like his inexperience as a hunter.
I completely agree, and I also love that, especially if you're fresher to the story of Dracula, it feels odd. Like you do kind of get this sense of like, why is he being so rude to this poor woman?
Well, not I wouldn't say he's being rude. He's being curt.
He is.
But on top of that, she's becoming a little bit more than like what the other brides have been, because the other brides, like we've said, are just there to hunt a little bit, or like starts to prey upon Harker, and then it's Dracula who swoops in to stop it. Whereas this one, the bride actually kind of gets her own action a little bit.
No, and I also think that the tone of the movie shifts in such a way that it still reads as a little scary today. The shift between her begging for help and then attacking him is really nicely done.
It's the part where it's a close up of her looking at the neck is really where that shifts, because it becomes that bit of sensuality that the older Draculas are lacking a little bit, where it's like, okay, this is, in any other movie, this would be a romantic scene of like, he'd look down on her, then it'd be a soft focus of her looking back at him.
And it's always the doe-eyed, and it would have been the doe-eyed look, and instead of having, especially for the 50s, 60s doe-eye with the raised eyebrows look, she has a much firmer and harder look. Her makeup is done a little bit more intense than I think probably would have been done for a more romantic scene. And it does add this almost predatory like instinct to watching the film.
Very much so. And I mean, that it pairs really well with when Dracula does pop in to stop her. That close-up of Christopher Lee, all bloody, mouthed, and just pissed off.
And we should note that this is the first Dracula film in color. Or I think technically vampire film in color.
I can't quote on that.
I can't guarantee vampire in general, but I can say for sure first Dracula film in color. And I think they used it to their advantage. Not only is he dripping blood, but we've got the red bloodshot contacts on. He's got a little bit of a crazed look. Hair's a little bit messed up, which, especially for a Christopher Lee character, that's really upsetting looking, because you kind of get used to like him looking proper all the time. Even if he's like standing on top of a tower whispering to the wind. He has a poise to him. He looks so wild in this scene. And it works, honestly, a little bit as a jump factor as well. Yeah,
it would be a jump scare by today's, or if it was reworked today, it'd be a jump scare, because like you'd have the bass drop. But it works because we already know that Harker's being preyed upon. So this is like the alpha predator coming in.
Absolutely. And there is such a uncertainty of where the story is going now, because even if you are familiar with the original, you are now like, okay, no, we're really deviating from what originally was. So you really are left with this question of like, okay, where are we going with this? How quickly are we going to like truly deviate? Yeah,
how are we fast tracking this story together? Because honestly, that's the other thing they do too, is Harker holds against Dracula a little bit. We're getting these like other changes that it's like, okay, in all the other adaptations, Harker is this weak-willed man
Absolutely.
that just submits to Dracula's will. In this one, he holds quite a bit until he gets knocked out. And honestly, his passing out is
it's very 50s.
It's very 50s, but it's very stage play. That's what we'll see a lot of with some of these reactions, is they are just that little bit over the top that kind of makes horror of Dracula a little bit comedic at times.
I completely agree, but knowing most of the actors' backgrounds, it does make sense. A lot of them were more classically trained, either in stage production or in song and singing. So it makes sense that we have this kind of like precedent for normally what would have been like a female like swoon, for him to be like, the horrors, the pain, bleh.
Well, and I mean, that's just something you see in English acting in general, is a good chunk of their actor pool starts off in theater.
Absolutely, and I think it does work for this movie. I know it's not everyone's style, but I kind of like it, especially in this instance, because it adds a level of drama of like, oh, now he's passed out. Well, I know it's a, trope as old as time, but what will happen next? Dun dun dun.
Very much so, because like we have this time jump of, it makes it almost dreamlike of whether it happened or not, because he wakes up in the morning, and also where he's waking up, he's at the foot of the bed, and at the end of the bed there's this trunk that's almost casket-like, and so it's very much setting up like he's almost in the grave a little bit.
Yeah. It also gives that almost lie that like, well, maybe he wakes up and this was all either a fever dream, or they're going to lie to him and be like, what are you talking about? You must have hit your head before you went to bed or something.
Yes, and then immediately casting that aside when he sees the wound on his neck and knowing that, okay, this wasn't real. It's that anguish in his expression of like, oh, I am royally fucked.
Yes, and we should talk about real quick that like the subtlety but brilliance of the prosthetics and like special effects of this movie. Granted, we just talked about how good Christopher Lee's close-up look. Even the small details of the bite wounds for a 50s, 60s film, they look very convincing. They look very good.
Very much so. I mean, that's the other thing, is like there are some really good effects and set pieces. It's just they're at odds with some of the rest of other parts of the movie.
They are, and granted, some of it has to do with, the budget was maybe a little small at times.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta work with what you got. I mean, hell, even just like the little bit of, not exposition, but explaining to the audience through his thought of leaving the warnings. It's a nice touch before, like, trying to kill Dracula. Like, because he's a dead man one way or the other. Either Dracula's gonna get him, or he goes to kill Dracula and succeeds.
For sure.
But even if he kills Dracula, he's gonna turn into a vampire.
That is true. That's true.
But I also do like how this movie's filmed in some regards, where it always follows or for the most part, it follows this idea of Chekhov's gun of,
yes,
it's, if the gun's shown, it's gonna play a role later on, and that's what they do at this doorway, because if you're watching the beginning, he looks over at this doorway suspiciously, and then just walks into the building, which is a little weird until it's revealed that, oh, this door is the door to Dracula's morning or daytime lair.
Yeah, I do find it partially because of the time period, a little bit humorous, that almost every single time that we need to find Dracula, which is honestly maybe half of the problem in this movie, is that we spend a lot of time being like, where's Dracula? Dracula is always about 5 feet to the left.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, like when we do see the coffin or where they're sleeping, there's no lids on them.
Okay, but talk about power play. You're such a powerful vampire that you don't even bother to lock your bedroom door. You don't have a lid for your coffin, and your wife vampire lady sleeps next door in her own vampire coffin. Not even like somewhere else in the house. You got all your eggs in one basket, and you're not worried at all.
Well, what I think it is, I think it's a time-saving thing, so that way you don't have to edit in opening up the coffins and all that stuff.
And also, it should be noted that these coffins are done, they're meant to be very, like, castle European setting, because we're told this is a castle. We don't really see that it's a castle.
We see 4 rooms if you include the hallway.
We don't even actually
5,
see...
sorry.
We don't even see, like, a overall shot of some random castle in Germany.
You get
an idea.
You get the just stretched out of when he arrives. That's like the only...
That is it.
Yeah.
That is it. And so I like that they went, well, we need to make you think that this is old world class, like, what would people think goes in a castle crypt, obviously stone and concrete, like tombs and mausoleums sort of situation. We can't make the lid for that, though. That would be silly.
Actually, you got something there of, like, it's made of stone, so you can't really, like... Is it conceivable that Harker can just remove probably a couple 100-pound lid to this coffin?
That is something else that this movie does not truly address, is... And granted, over the years, what Dracula and vampires can do has honestly grown quite a lot. The super strength is not part of this Dracula. And I kind of like that they acknowledge that regularly. Like, there's multiple times where if it was nowadays, he'd run faster, there'd be no trouble moving the stone lid by himself with one arm.
He'd be a little paler.
He probably would be a little paler.
Not sparkly, though, but pale.
Probably not. But this Dracula is just a dude.
Very much so.
He's a sexy dude, but he's just a dude.
Yeah. But I also do like that they have these really cool semi-artsy moments where, like, Harker is stalking them and we see his shadow, and also when he kills the lady vampire, she turns old when she dies.
I do like that.
It is such a cool, like, idea of, like, okay, well, they revert that the vampirism only keeps their youth until they die, and then it reveals what they really are.
And technically, this film does not say that sunlight, like, crisps the vampire. It just kills them. It's just fatal, which does imply later that Dracula is so old he turns to dirt.
Yes.
I love that. That's such a good detail, and an old movie, you don't normally get those.
Mm-hmm. And then doing a little bit of parallel action with him killing her, and then the sun setting down, showing it's too late.
It's too late for him to, I don't know, chain himself to the wall or something?
Well, no, because Dracula's gonna get him.
Well, true, but...
But that's what I like, is that how dramatic Dracula is in this.
He's so dramatic.
Is he leaves the room to close the door to return and make this dramatic entrance to kill Harker. Like,
he really does.
It is such a dumb bit to this movie, but I love it.
This was something that in one of the much later interviews where they talked with Christopher Lee about his career as Dracula, he talked fairly openly and regularly about how he felt that the original book Dracula was a little bit too stiff, and that he didn't think that a coat with tails and a bow tie really fit the suave dramatic grace of this count.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the over the top extraness that the character like later developed is directly thanks to Christopher Lee's depiction of him.
Good.
And I think this is a great example of just like the need to be dramatic as part of being a vampire. Because there's so many examples later of why is the character being like this? Well, he's Dracula. That's not how he is in the book, though. He's very practical minded in the book. But Christopher Lee's character brings him to this level of like, well, if I'm going to stalk him, I'm at least going to do it with flair.
Yeah, it's a little bit that feels more theatrical than what would be realistic.
It's something that, again, only Christopher Lee could have possibly come up with, and also done in such a way where while you're in the movie, while you're watching it, this scene doesn't read as funny. No. It truly does. You worry for him, you know that he's going to die, but it does feel tense and suspenseful. It's only after you're done watching the film and you're like analyzing scene by scene like we are that you go, that was a little extra.
A little bit. I do like that in the tradition of altering the story of Dracula for this, it takes a bit of a twist like Psycho where we switch protagonists now to Van Helsing.
Which I love that this movie does change to Van Helsing, a character who throughout the decades slowly turns into his own myth and legend. And in the original storytellings and even previous movies, he's kind of a nothing character. He's
a bit of a nut job that's been relegated to his little corner of the world studying mythology.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes down to the writer de-aging him. The original stories and movies show him usually as a much older crackpot sort of doctor, usually with silly hair. This one, he's a much younger and much more handsome young man.
Studying folklore.
Folklore, yeah. In this one, though, specifically, vampire expert. And also a little bit of a crazy man, but not too bad.
Yeah, not really. Because, like, that's the other thing that they do to fast track this, is they don't really go past his relationship with Harker. And it's just well, they were partners, or Harker was his student. Like, it's nothing other than like, oh, Harker went out to go kill this Dracula. Now I'm here because I haven't heard from it. It's like, it's a little bit like Supernatural, a little bit of like, I haven't heard from Harker in 10 days. Well, he's probably fine. Harker went hunting, and I haven't heard from him in 10 days.
Yes, it does feel supernaturally. But again, the fast tracking of these characters' relationships by updating who's related to who's dating who, all that sort of intertwining works so much better because now we have a reason to care about who and why, especially the women in the like human side of the story, are important and not just fodder for Dracula.
And they do become a bit fodder.
They do, but again, this movie does change that to be a little bit more interesting. They add a like level of danger and difference to this Dracula that there's no other way he could have done this.
Yeah, they're not just tits for us to ogle and food for Dracula's thirst.
And I would argue that starting here, there is some very clever writing that changes it from being a visual romantic movie to a gothic horror. And a lot of that has to do with how these characters interact with each other.
Yeah, well, and like the villagers are suspicious of Van Helsing to begin with, but I also, like in their interactions, there's that one barmaid who's a bit more helpful than she should be, and that's how we get the journal to Van Helsing.
Yeah. But
I also like in their conversation that there's a little bit that mentions that they kind of go in to check on Dracula from time to time. It's like,
wouldn't you though? Wouldn't you like send one brave guy to be like, okay, I need you to like double check that he doesn't have more people living up there? Because granted, there is technically, and we assume, another human because he has a butler. Dracula has a butler.
Not in this movie.
Not in this movie, but it's one of those things where like the villagers are just...
There are some questions I have with this.
Okay, yeah.
Because when Van Helsing does go to the castle, Dracula is riding off.
Yes.
And there's no indication of him having horses or like who's running the coach.
True.
And then on top of that, he has a completely different coffin. Does he have like different coffins to travel? Is this like... It's so different from the one we saw earlier where it's like...
There's no way this is the same coffin.
Yes, Jenkins, I'll take the white coffin for traveling super incognito this time. Because it's not even like he's hiding in another like place or they're trying to hide anything. It is just a horse carriage driving a solo white coffin. Not
casket. Not even that. This is a funeral procession wagon. Like, this is something that would have only been used for like the very best people. Like, think the Queen and King. They had a procession with this damn carriage sort of style. Like, why? The other question that I have that this movie blissfully does not answer, just, this can't be one of the village people. They clearly would not be willing to help him. Or one village person is being paid enough to do this.
I mean, I can see it. Dracula's supposed to be from old money, so...
That is one of the things that, while this movie never directly says, and part of the reason that it's a little less clear is because they didn't have the budget to film, like, an actual castle, it's just implied very lightly that Dracula is filthy rich, as opposed to other versions, especially where we start off with the real estate deal, where we know for certain that part of Dracula's allure is that he is filthy fucking rich.
Yeah, and he's a foreigner, so they're going to sell him the shit piece of land, or shit property.
This actually works better for the direction that the director and Christopher Lee wanted, where they wanted this just pure sex icon of Dracula. Money helps, but it's not his main feature. Nobody's doing this for the money.
It's the power and
It's the
fear.
power. And that is something that Christopher Lee in multiple interviews talks regularly about, is the attraction to the power of Dracula is what really sold him the role. And I see it. I think they did a good job because, again, what an exit. Look at, like, not only do they leave, they bust out in a hurry, all white horses, in a pure black funeral procession carriage that only a king would have. Magnificent. What an exit from your own home.
Like we said, this movie has some moments that are a bit extra.
It's so extra. I love it.
Yeah, and even then, like, when he goes to inspect the castle, everything's a little bit disheveled. But it does lead to a little bit of a rough transition because now we've gone from figuring out what Dracula is doing to, oh, now I'm back home telling all your loved ones that, yeah, he's dead.
Yeah, this is where it does kind of help if you have seen a few of the 50s movies, because the literary devices that tell you how Van Helsing knows kind of what Dracula is roughly going to do next are kind of subtle, and they're well used in the time period. We don't use them anymore. So like the opening of what was the photo and picking out the one single piece.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays we would show like a great effort of him like putting that in his pocket or something. In this one, he just crumples it and drops all of it and leaves in the kind of a huff.
Mm-hmm.
A standard like storytelling device for the 50s and 60s, but not something we do anymore. So I can see how this part would be feel a little jumpy, especially if you're not used to this sort of movie telling.
Yeah, and honestly, I think part of it too is there is this, okay, now we've had conflict with Dracula. Van Helsing hasn't met him yet, but now we have to continue the plot and make it more interesting. So now Van Helsing has to have some type of repulsory reaction with this family of people that we don't even know how well he knows them.
Well, he doesn't know them because the only reason he knows them is because he knew Jonathan, and Jonathan's fiance is the sister of the other guy.
That's right.
And then his wife, I think, in this version, is the other woman.
Yeah.
So, like, there's like they all know each other, and Helsing is the outsider in this story.
Yeah, I mean, he was an outsider in the original, too.
Yeah, but he was like a weird little old man in this one.
Yeah, professor that they knew close enough.
In this one, they moved him to doctor status, which, again, is a little bit of a 50s, especially British storytelling device of just like, how are we going to get this man in the room with a woman? It's improper. I know, make him a doctor. I mean, it works.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, it is shocking for the family. I mean, all we know that he told them is he went to this castle to be a librarian.
Yeah, that would be really upsetting.
Yeah. But it's a way to bring that threat back and carry Harker's death and mystery to this new group of people instead of like, okay, well, now we gotta figure out what Dracula's doing and go on a mystery hunt ourselves.
Well, and again, it helps to have the 50s storytelling kind of already under your belt, because we also know that a huge part of, like, Van Helsing's idea is, well, the photo's missing. He's probably going after her because he has heard of her. He's probably seen a photo. He's like, hey, she's good enough looking, and I know one of the brides is dead. Gotta replace her. Mm-hmm. Going for this one.
Yeah, well, and it also has to kind of reset us a bit, too. I mean, if it's 1958 and there hasn't been another Dracula or vampire movie in a while, we have to have Van Helsing tell us that, okay, well, here's his weaknesses, that even to the point where the butler finds him talking to himself a bit odd.
Okay, but this is something that I honestly think works fairly well for this time period storytelling device. Instead of him telling other people what the weaknesses are, we eventually get to few of them. But having him, like, listen to his own recordings and then monologue back into the wax recorder is actually kind of smart. It does fill the audience in on what we're supposed to be interested and know, because we do change the powers here.
Exactly. It's so much better than, like, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter, where they have a record player about 50, 60 years too early.
Yeah, but also maybe too late, depending on other technology in the story. It's very strange.
Yeah.
But no, this is the other thing. It's futuristic enough for the time period, but now is foreign and interesting enough to kind of keep you interested while he monologues.
Yeah, and it resets the myth, and we have to learn, like, okay, there's a couple things that, okay, the garlic and stuff, that doesn't really matter.
It's just a kind of okay repellent. It's not a guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
The crosses, though, we will find out is a big part of it. More specifically, iron crosses, but they very lightly cover that in this one. It's just, I think, mostly a styling piece because silver shows up nicely on the camera.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we're not super, super far out from World War II, so an association with the Iron Cross.
Yeah, granted, for the most part, this movie kind of goes out of its way to make sure that the cross is like a full Catholic rosary-styled cross, with one very quick, deviation from that at the very final battle scene, which feels an appropriate time to, like, maybe make an exception.
Yeah. And I do like that while Van Helsing still trying to figure everything out, we get the threat coming right to Lucy, which is the nice little twist that Lucy still is the victim, but she was Harker's love interest and not Mina this time around.
Yes, I do like this change. The other thing that I really like is that this movie very cleverly plays off of the old idea of bed rest being so required for health. Lucy's 100% using this to her advantage. And we find that out so quickly. It's kind of a nice little, like, insider joke for the audience watching.
Yeah. I mean, it plays to her detriment, too.
It does. But, I mean, this is something where instead of attempting to get her up and out and maybe moving her to the seaside, which was another pretty common trope of the time to like, oh man, she's not feeling good. I don't know, put her in the ocean.
If you could afford it, the fresh air or go get mountain air.
Literally anywhere but London.
Yeah, to fight consumption or whatever little disease was popping up at that time.
Which wasn't the worst idea, because as we eventually learned, coal lung was a huge problem in London.
Coal lung, baker's lung, there were all types of different lungs that were going to kill you.
Absolutely. I like that this one does a nice little nod of like, oh, well, we've decided in this one that she's just going to have nice little bed rest with open air at night. Pretty common, like, trope of the time. But here's the thing, Dracula, and you're like, okay, I see I see the thought process here.
Yeah, and there's some cool cinematography here too, where he pulls his cape over her and it blacks out the screen to work as the wipe.
And honestly, works really well to, again, level up Dracula in the desirability category, because it adds that level of mystery and suaveness that just other Draculas did not do at the time.
Oh, very much so. And then immediately it's okay, she's sick, but conventional medicine's not working, obviously. And so this is what's forcing them to go to Van Helsing for a second opinion. Also, I do like that Lucy is not dense, but I also like how calm Van Helsing is here, where he's like, okay, yes, you're smart. Like, that's what you were talking about, where like the women aren't just dumb creatures to be ogled at in some of these other vampire movies.
And part of that was the directing from Fisher, on both this scene, or the upcoming scene with Lucy, and then later with Mina, when asked, like, well, what sort of facial expression, especially at the time, a lot of women acting roles were very face acting heavy. You didn't really say a lot, but you were expected to have a close-up and at least one kiss scene. The way he handled it was like, all right, I want you to think that you've had the most passionate, secret night of your life. Give me that face from both of you for these two different scenes. And it works. Like, even if you didn't know that that was the direction they had, they feel so cat-like. They feel like they've been up to no good. Even though technically both of them were supposed to just, like, be at home, not doing much. Or, oh, I just went out for a walk, honey. This sort of direction really helps sell the idea of Dracula being like this next level. He's so irresistible that there's nothing you can do about it.
Oh, very much so. Or it's the call. It's almost like when we talk about like the call of the sirens, it's the male equivalent of that.
Yes, absolutely.
And even then, like when Van Helsing is trying to help, I like that his methods still feel out of place for everyone else. And that also, like, the garlic, for some reason, is torturous to the victims now because they're infected a little bit with vampirism, so they're feeling some of the issues. This
was an interesting choice that the movie stuck with, is this idea that once you're bitten, you will eventually turn. How quickly, the movie's not clear, because it seems to vary depending on who you are.
Very much so.
But it is something interesting that I like that they stuck with, because it adds a few horror elements that we wouldn't otherwise get. The stifling of the garlic, that scene felt truly kind of like she felt like she was truly having a bad time.
Yeah, and it's not 100% putting the blame on the maid for removing it like in other iterations. It's just, or being hypnotized by Dracula to remove it. And this time it's the disease working against the victim. And
then in a little bit, we're going to get to see the effects of iron or the cross on the victims, and how even the victims get burned from that.
Yes.
A great horror element.
Yes, and that's the thing too. There are some really dumb moments to this too.
There are.
The writing is just like, okay, you got a time frame, you got to fast track some of this, because when Lucy does die, nothing seems to have changed any of their opinions about Van Helsing until the police get involved.
Yes.
And a little girl,
a random little girl from the neighborhood.
It takes her to make Holmwood believe that, okay, maybe there is something to her death other than this woman dying tragically real quick, and we totally didn't notice the 2 puncture mark wounds in her neck.
So there is, again, knowledge of the 50s and 40s, which a lot of this was based off of for the filming style, helped a little bit. So not looking too closely at the body, pretty common, especially for women. It's also implied that, like, she was removed from the house, which would have been odd for the time period. Normally you would have, like, had an open wake in her own home. She would have been up there for a couple days, if not weeks, for people to come say goodbye and give a little peck on the cheek to the dead person. How fun. But, so having her quickly removed would have been odd and probably very upsetting, which would explain, like, everyone's reaction to the whole thing a little bit better than we would see now. The other, like, little bit that is maybe the only detail that I personally wasn't a fan of is they don't bother to spend the extra 4 seconds to have Van Helsing be like, you need to put her in, like, a lockbox.
Yeah.
Like, cremate her.
Well, and I think that's what helps drive the drama a little bit too, is because Van Helsing's not directly involved, but Homewood is like, you know what? Maybe there's something to this. I'm going to go investigate my sister's death myself.
I do appreciate that. I also do think it's a little funny that we do introduce the little girl character, and you are immediately, especially when you're watching this, you're just like, well, of course. She's such a nice person. Of course she's befriended the neighborhood children.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the next time we see Lucy, it goes from her being dead to guiding a child into their mausoleum area.
And, like, regularly the child's like, yeah, Lucy said we were going for a walk. We go with walks with Lucy all the time. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Do we know these people? Because it's not implied like, oh, our neighbor's kid who we love and we see regular, or, oh, my niece who lives up the street, or even my own child. Because they very easily could have been like, oh, it's my own child. You know, you just don't see her because she's at school or some bullshit.
Yeah.
They're just like, no, random little girl.
Oh, very much so. And, I mean, honestly, Lucy's fang bit are a little bit cheesy, and I like that. When she's about to go and kill her own brother, and Van Helsing has just been hiding in the sidelines for the last minute to put the Iron Cross on her face.
I do love that he waits until the very last possible minute to intervene, which is hilarious, because his intervening technique does not leave any question for anyone. Not only is your dead sister back, and she has fangs, but also she's, like, repulsed by the sight of the cross.
Yeah.
Like,
not just repulsed, it burns her face.
Well, he puts it on her, and that burns her face. But, like, even just standing there be like, back, demon, she's like, no. I do agree. The fangs on Lucy are a little extra. They're a little big for her, but I think they kind of fit in line with the other fangs that we've already seen. From like, Jonathan's character was maybe the worst fangs, and he barely shows them because he's dead almost immediately. But I have a feeling that we just kind of had the same fangs for everyone, and they were the size for Christopher Lee, because his fangs look pretty good.
Yeah. Like,
I have no real complaints. I'm also fairly impressed that everyone speaks pretty well. That is one of the the regular complaints I have with vampire movies, especially the ones that use regular prosthetic fangs, especially older ones, is they weren't the kind that we have now where they snap onto the very tips of your teeth and are a little bit more normal as far as, like, your bite. These ones sit in front of your teeth.
They're like the crappy costume ones that you get at the arcades.
100% they are. And so normally those cause what we now kind of think of as the start of the Dracula lisp. This movie avoids the lisp pretty well. It's actually very impressive, especially Lucy's character, who those teeth definitely don't fit her. And she sounds pretty much the same. I'm very impressed with that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and, like, there's some other aspects to this movie, too, outside of the costuming and whatnot, where, like, the reasoning behind why Dracula is even here, that this is his revenge. He's gonna take Harker's love as his bride now, and it's just,
I do find that funny, but again, remember, this was meant to be the most sexually, like, interesting vampire to date. So I kind of see it as, like, this, like, dark, macabre sort of revenge.
Yeah. I mean, but it does that, but it also is a way to keep it in line with the original Dracula story.
Very true. Very, very true.
Because it changes it from, okay, this is just what vampires do. They collect a group of brides, to, like, okay, his revenge is to desecrate the thing that he loved, like Harker ruined his love.
True. The other thing that I find very interesting is they did make a choice to change what Lucy is wearing for this. They put her, instead of putting her in her best clothes or what would have been her wedding dress, which would have been a little bit more appropriate for the time, or even a black dress, which also would have been appropriate for the time period and would have been appropriate for many more decades, they put her in essentially a white bedroom, like her like night clothes, which gives off a ghost-like look. Like they're very billowy, they flow really nicely as she like kind of ferries her way through the trees. Would not have been what Lucy would have been buried in.
No.
Unless Lucy was buried correctly and was like, I must be free! And essentially was running around in her bra and underwear.
Yeah. It's some fun things to think about when, like, you really try and put it with the times.
I'm 100% sure that it was just done to give the, like, ghostly, like, ethereal-esque effect without spending a ton on like a random ass costume.
Yeah,
kind of
because
bringing the bride styling back a little bit with like, oh, she's just so crazy. She's just out here in her shift.
Yeah, because this movie's supposed to be set in like the 1700s or something.
Yeah, Victorian-esque.
Yeah, close
roughly.
enough.
Yeah, she would not have been buried in her essentially underwear. This would have been her underwear.
Yeah. But I do. There are some other things I do appreciate, like in her killing. The way Van Helsing frames it as liberating her shell from the evil within, which is
very nice.
It's like a very poetic way to do it, but her acting of her throes of death, her facial expressions are just terrible, and they're just kind of like, it's like, okay, I know what you're going for, but this is...
Again, I think the fangs are maybe in the way.
Maybe.
Because they are kind of the only thing you stare at while this is happening. But bonus for this scene, we do get wells of blood coming up when the spike goes through, something that was not normal for the time, or for several other vampire movies afterwards. We kind of skip that part and make them kind of bloodless monsters. This rehumanizes the killing of the vampire, which adds again to that horror element, which I like so much.
Not necessarily the vampire, the victims of said vampire.
Exactly, because we'll get to Dracula's death and how crusty that man is. But and then on top of that, the screams of agony, I do think were done well. I do think the actual scream sound effect turned out really well.
Yeah, it's just the facial features look like she's trying to imitate Jim Carrey a little bit. Even
I mean,
Jim
he wasn't
Carrey,
alive yet. But no, I agree. The facial expressions are a little odd, and I do think part of it is just because the actress was not, I don't think, a horror actress before this. I think she did more standard movies. Not 100% sure on that, though.
Yeah, I didn't do too much digging into what the rest of the cast was in.
But also part of that is the way that they've done her makeup for this is to make sure you understand that she's like dead and also the vampire. So we've added a very sexy smoke and like eyeshadow and facial features to her with makeup to really sell the like, oh, she's extra sexy as a vampire.
Yeah.
Which works. Does read a little silly when we do a close-up for the death scene. On top of the fangs. And then also the sound the sound of the screaming is clearly like a dubbed sound, which I like the sound.
Yeah.
But it reads a little silly.
Yeah, very much so. And in some of this silliness too, I like that there's this reframing. Like we've talked about, there are changes to how Dracula's done. Mm-hmm. And Van Helsing does this very scientific approach, estimating that Dracula is about 500 to 600 years old.
I do like that we've youngified Dracula, because many have made him older.
But unlike the last scene where he was talking to a gramophone, it's him talking to Homewood, debunking the ideas of changing into wolves and other creatures, something that Sangster wanted to do to avoid the cliches that Universal had built up, and which I do have a little bit of issues with it later on, but like I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to create something that's different from the previous iterations of vampires that you've seen before.
Well, and on top of that, they've made such a pretty strong argument for what Dracula's powers are up until this point. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of nice to just kind of really nip in the bud any potential like twist with the powers, have those be the same throughout, and have the rest of the story be based off of these characters that we're already interested in.
Yeah.
I think it's a smart writing.
Oh, very much so. But what's kind of dumb is that when they do start trying to investigate a little bit more, Van Helsing is using his doctor position to try and press for information.
Okay, again, it helps a little bit if you watch 50s, especially 50s, British movies, which I know is a very small niche little like section of the movie world. But again, this is a trope that was used pretty regularly of like, oh, how do you get into a woman's room? Be a doctor. How do you get stuff? Be a doctor. How do you bully people? Be a rich doctor.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, is because they're using this as while they're out, Dracula's, it just makes sense, and Lucy's death ends up just being this setup for why Mina gets into danger, but...
True. I mean, it doesn't feel totally useless.
No, it doesn't, but at the same time, it's just like, okay, well, it's just a warning of like, okay, he's coming for the next person. Van Helsing killed his last bride, so now he's coming for her.
Granted, it does keep a pattern, though, going with this version of Dracula, which, again, the director and Christopher Lee were really invested in,
Mm-hmm.
and so having them just continuously go after women, again, kind of leads into the whole, like, over-sexual power that Dracula now we know has.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of power, I like that in their investigation, all they do is just bribe the Waypoint guy.
Yeah, which I also love that the Waypoint guy, when we first see him, is kind of portrayed as like a male train station person, who then later we learn is just like the toll road guy.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I also love that we give just enough interesting character features about this little wheezy man.
Yeah.
Like, he's genuinely interesting. He's on screen for maybe like a minute total.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on top of that, like we talk about with how the women are written a little bit smarter than normal, Mina, on the other hand, is just kind of dumb just following these messages.
Okay, so this is something that I kind of like about Mina's character.
Mm-hmm.
She's trusting, and it plays into this idea that the men have decided that this is like a secret thing that's too much. It's playing off of the idea that they had with Lucy of like, we don't want to shock the women. Again, pretty common trope for the time, especially if you're playing off of the like Victorian time period. That makes sense. That writes well. But something that I think works well in favor of Mina's character, as far as like, oh, she's not that stupid, is yes, she gets tricked the first time, but then once she gets hooked, she gets pretty wily about how she keeps getting out of the house, and then eventually not having to get out of the house.
Well, is that just her, or is that the vampiric influence?
I like to think that it's Mina, because even though this one scene shows like her weakness and trustingness, we do know that she is smart enough and caring enough, because we have a few interactions earlier with her talking about how, oh, we really shouldn't tell Lucy right now. Let's wait until she's at least, feeling better. Then it's not a lot. We don't get a ton of Mina character at all, but I do like that we get hints, which is arguably more than a lot of other Dracula movies give Mina.
Yeah, fair. Fair. But I do like that while they're investigating, like, the coffin's missing, so, like, there's just some weird arranging of things at the end of setting up Mina to be next, and then it's forcing the other two to act, but at the same time now, Dracula's inside, but, like, is that just the part of the myth that we're kind of, or the folklore that we're moving away from, that he doesn't have to get permission to...
He does not have to get permission in this one.
Okay.
And we know that from the very beginning with him and Lucy, because she does not invite him in. He just strolls his ass into her room.
Fair.
Again, kind of like he doesn't actually disappear. He just kind of shows up on the wind.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, too, is like, what did they just remove that so that way he could be dramatically at the bottom of the stairs?
110% they did, because not only is that used for, like, the bottom of the stairs, but multiple times the cape, which Christopher Lee is the one who wanted the cape. They use wind to move that sucker around. They show off multiple, like, empty streets or empty, like, sides. And be like, is he here? Is he over there? Mm-hmm. No, he's in your own home. Like, it's definitely all to just build the suspense and the horror element of the movie. Yeah,
making the men pretty much useless until the last minute. But also at the same time, like, so they give Lucy this transfusion. And it's like, they give Mina the transfusion.
Yeah.
They give Mina the transfusion. It's like, so your guy's thought wasn't to do this to Lucy? So you just kind of like, oh, we're going to try and treat it with this garlic. And if it doesn't go away, oh well.
That is one of the, like, frustrating things is it is so briefly mentioned when he's monologuing to himself with his own little wax recorder, that he talks about how garlic is effective at the earliest stages of the infection, and then later it's not as potent and only really a nuisance to to the beast.
Well, then what is it now? Because, like, all we saw was that Mina had been preyed upon twice what we saw, but there could have been other times in between before. Well, that still doesn't make sense, too, because then garlic should have been helpful for...
Lucy had 10 days with Dracula, though. Because it took 10 days for him to come back and be like, oh my gosh, your friend's dead, your fiance's dead.
Well, no, I mean, like, Mina.
But Mina doesn't have 10 days. She has only maybe 2 days.
So why not use the garlic there? Because it's
Mina, they do use the garlic on Mina.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do. Oh, they use the transfusion.
Yeah, they use the transfusion on Mina. That's what I'm saying. They don't use this on Lucy.
Lucy's too far gone. She's been 10 days with this monster. She's practically a vampire already.
It should help it better. It's better blood.
I don't think so.
I don't know. It's just a stupid spot that doesn't really work with me.
It doesn't really work. I think it's honestly, if I'm being very clear, I think it's really 99% in the movie to keep Mina from dying, because they've written themselves into a little bit of a corner with the whole if you're bit, you will turn sort of thing. But also, I think it's there to really prove that Helsing is an actual doctor, because in other versions of the story, especially for around this time, the like fan ones or like previous movies, he's not really a doctor, he's like a professor doctor.
Yeah. Like
PhD doctor. Whereas this kind of proves he is, in some capable way, a medical doctor. Yeah. Which is something that does stick around for later versions of Van Helsing. He does become an actual doctor in later stories. Yeah,
and the other, I think, weak thing about the end of this movie is that the clues are just given to the end that, the vampire was in the house all along.
Okay, but as someone who loves movies like Clue, where the answer is the stupidest possible thing, I kind of love this being the horror element, because it kind of gives call is coming from inside the home vibes. Yeah. Way before that was like a thing.
Yeah, well, and there's also just some other dumb stuff around it, too, of, like, I do find it funny that the maid's, like, freaking out, so they slap the hysteria out of her.
I do love that. That cracks me up. Again, it helps if you're familiar with the time period, and also, like, the idea that, again, got translated from Victorian times. Whether or not those ideas were real, I'm not a Victorian expert, I can't say. But it was a pretty common trope. However, I will say that this slap in particular, he threw it all into that slap. Yeah. This one was a little bit extra on the slap.
Yeah. Well, there's also the goofy bit of, I know why they're trying to do it, is while they're in the basement, Dracula's taking Mina away. Yeah. But there's that, like, they're going to run back, but Van Helsing has the forethought to just toss a cross into the coffin of like, he's gonna come back here, instead of like he rides off to his castle.
He has to ride off to his castle. Okay, this is one of the things that I actually do like about this telling of Dracula, is the desperation for him to be in the coffin when the sun comes up versus just not in the sun. I kind of like the pressure and limitations it adds to the character, because we will eventually get to Dracula-esque characters, or just Dracula retelling characters, where he's so overpowered he's almost godlike, which is cool because we hamp up everyone else. But this one adds such a hard limitation of he has to be in a coffin with his own dirt.
Well, here's the thing. For me, I don't think it works, because there's not that bit of like, he tries going back to his coffin. They just throw the cross in there, and he's already off. He's leaving with
I agree.
Mina.
I don't think the 81 minutes or 82 minutes that this movie is running, they take the time to show him coming back and be like, foiled. Yeah. But I think it's more for the audience to be like, well, of course he couldn't go back. Like, it's to pick up the pace a little bit.
Yeah, well, and also they're setting up the danger of like, if he gets back to his castle, we might not be able to ever find him in there. And it's like, the castle's not that big, and you can hunt all day.
Okay, but they do address that very quickly. Okay. Because he does get back to the castle, we do quickly peek our head into his normal chambers, and he's not down there. So he must be somewhere else in the castle. He must have another coffin. This man has a lot of beds just hiding out.
Yeah, he's got a lot of beds, but he's still digging. I get.
He's trying to bury Mina.
Yeah, because she has to have a grave, so that way she has graveyard dirt.
Yeah.
But I do like that
I like how he's just, like, shoveling dirt on her, get in there.
Not even just that, but, like, as they're getting closer, he just, like, yeets her into the grave and runs away.
He's, like, and I get it, I get what the direction was, but it does read very silly.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that the way that they were hoping you would read the, like, oh, we won't find him, is that there's a secret trap door that is in the throne room behind the throne, and that has a grave in it that we never see because he doesn't make it all the way there.
Yeah.
But I think that was the idea, is that he's got this ancient old castle, and again, remember, this is like fairy tale English writing and then presented to American audience. Mm-hmm. So, like, well, of course the castle has all these hidden rooms and little secret hidey holes that he could have a coffin in every one of them. We'd spend days looking for him, and then at night he could just waltz away.
Yeah.
Like, that, I think that was the idea that was supposed to be played, and then we moved to the fight scene so quickly that we don't really have time to, like, think about any of that.
Yeah, well, and I also like that in this fight scene, instead of just going for the neck like we would see in other movies.
Absolutely.
Dracula, while he is stronger than the men, he still has to, like, strangle them and subdue them because they're not willing victims.
Yes, and also, again, he's strong. He's not superhuman strong. He just happens to be, like, a little bit better than they are. Mm-hmm. Which I like. I kind of prefer a vampire who is almost the same as a person, just a little bit supernatural.
Yeah, very much so. And then also in the writing where the impromptu cross works, because it's just like, okay, now we have to bring in this part of the lore for convenience sake, where we didn't really establish anything else other than they don't like crosses or garlic.
No, they do kind of explain the cross. They, like, very briefly it is explained to...
But what I'm saying is, like, why this aspect of the lore compared to other parts of the lore.
Oh, sure. No, well, partially because we don't ever tell anyone else that more lore exists. Mm-hmm. We briefly talk about the ones that they thought people would know, which was the transformation of bats and wolves, and they're like, that's not happening. Everything else, you don't know about it. You haven't read the book. Woo! You're like, well, yeah, probably.
Yeah. Well, and it leads to the cool burning away and, like, crumpling cool. Because he's so old that he returns to dust.
And in a fantastic, very detailed, but very horror element, balls of hair roll across to the floor after he's done. He, like, opens the window and little balls of hair roll away, and I'm like, oh, that's nasty, but that's a good touch.
Yeah, just the dustbin that they pulled the ashes from. And then also, like, going back to Mina and her cross burn fading away is, okay, she's saved. It's the end
Dracula's
of a happy
dead.
story.
Yeah.
But yeah, Horror of Dracula.
Lovely. Was
so successful that it led to 8 sequels, which Lee didn't appear in Brides because he didn't want to be typecast as Dracula, but he returned for the 3rd movie, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, 8 years later, and then would be in 6 of the other sequels.
He sure did. Crushing would come back to be in 4 others as Van Helsing.
Specifically the very last one in the 7 Golden Vampires, which is
an odd choice, but yeah.
A kung fu movie on top of that.
You know what? Again, part of the reason why I like vampire films is, especially after this point, a lot of them got silly. Mm-hmm. But I like that we start off so serious with the franchise. We start off with such a solid base, because without a solid base, there's not room for other silly things to keep being made.
Yeah, and this is what started the core of the Hammer horror films. Well, Frankenstein was successful.
Beginning,
yeah. Well, not the beginning, but, like, the beginning of the rise.
Absolutely.
Dracula really pushed Hammer into the namesake we know it as today. And honestly, it is weird looking back because Horror of Dracula got an X rating. And granted, it's the UK, so they're very strict on some stupid stuff. Like, Django was banned because there was an ear cut off. And that was, like, the extent of the gore.
No, it absolutely was the start of, like, a new wave of horror, especially monster-based horror. Mm-hmm. Because Dracula is such a good entry and filler horror monster that even if it's a silly movie, even if it's just kind of a lackluster remake, you know Dracula will always do moderately well because he's always a good villain.
Mm-hmm. I mean, hell, we've seen so many reboots of him, like Dracula Untold, Nosferatu, Nick Cage was Renfield.
Hell yeah, he was.
Well, he was Dracula in Renfield, but yeah, there's just so many attempted retellings that this one stands out because it is such a classic styling, but only slightly different and updated than what we really see today.
Absolutely. And I know that it originally got an X rating from the British rating system, but I do kind of see it when you are truly watching this in like proper movie watching style. There's still, to this day, plenty of elements that read truly as horror. There's plenty of times that the suspense and tension are very high. And granted, it's not super gory, but the blood aspects are pretty good. We're not too shy to show them.
No, not at all. So, Chris, good, bad, weird, what do you rate Horror of Dracula?
Now, I've seen the other ones, and those ones are weird. But this one's not. This one is just good. This is a classic. I come back to it time and time again. I love this movie. It's so good.
Yeah, I'm gonna lean to good, bad.
Sure.
Because while I love it as well, it is a very solid adaptation of Dracula, and it has a lot going for it, and why it's so iconic too. I can see why.
Sure.
It is such rough and it's so rough in some places and so cheesy in a couple spots where like it just takes me out of it. Where it's like, okay, I know what you're trying to do, but this is kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I totally see it. It teeters on that, but I don't know. Maybe I'm a little soft for it.
So, Chris, do you recommend Horror of Dracula?
I absolutely do. I have recommended this movie for a long, long time, and I will continue to recommend it, especially to people who have decided to like maybe pursue watching a bunch of vampire movies like you recently have.
I do not recommend trying to go through 150 between January and now.
No, that was very ambitious of you, but good job. However, especially if you are specifically wanting to watch Dracula movies for Halloween, this is a really great place to start because it does set a great base layer for what a Dracula movie could look like. It's not too scary for most people. I think it's pretty approachable.
Yeah.
And so, for me, this is an easy recommendation, especially for Halloween.
Yeah, it's modern enough without going too classical with its styling or leaning too heavily into like Dracula 70 AD or
absolutely
Yorga the Vampire, which by the way my dad has been telling me about this vampire movie for years. He couldn't remember what it was, but it's Dracula looks into a van. Thought it was the scariest thing. now it's cheesy, but it's
sure.
It's that type of thing where like, yeah, probably in the 58 for a lot of people it was scary, but nowadays it's a much more approachable vampire movie.
Absolutely it is. And I also think it's a great jumping off point as far as if you are looking to get into the lore and history of movie Dracula.
Very much so. And honestly, I'm very excited for what we have kicking off. Why use this to kick off October and what we have planned. I mean,
me too. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and I hope everyone is looking forward to our month of vampire as well, because next week we are going into something that's a little bit more family friendly, but it's the only family friendly one we are doing compared to this one, which is maybe family friendly.
I would say maybe for a little bit older of a kid.
Maybe. Anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.